I never thought I'd be planning my own funeral at 35. Not like this, anyway. But here I was, frozen in my hallway, listening to my husband and mother in law casually discuss my death over coffee. My name is Nicole, and until 20 minutes ago, I thought I was living a normal, if somewhat strained, life. I'd left Lauren's house early, cutting our weekly girls' night short because of a migraine. Now, I wished I'd stayed. It has to look natural. Jonathan's voice drifted from the kitchen. We can't risk any suspicions. The medication I suggested will do exactly that, Helen replied, her tone as casual as if discussing dinner plans. Mixed into her evening tea, she'll just drift off. No pain, no mess. I pressed my hand against my mouth to stifle a gasp. The designer handbag I'd been about to drop slipped silently to the carpet. "And you're sure it can't be traced?" Jonathan asked. "Darling, I was a nurse for 30 years. Trust your mother on this." My stomach churned. The same woman who'd criticized my cooking at Sunday dinners for the past decade was now plotting my murder over chocolate biscuits. I could smell them, the ones she always brought over, claiming mine were too dry. "What about the insurance company?" Jonathan's chair scraped against the tile. "They'll investigate. That's why we wait until after the policy's 2-year contestability period ends. 3 more months, and it'll be perfect timing." I'd signed that policy at Jonathan's insistence. "It's just responsible planning, sweetheart," he'd said, kissing my forehead. Now I understood why he'd pushed for such a high coverage amount. "The funeral will have to be tasteful," Helen continued. "Nothing too elaborate. That would seem suspicious. But we can't appear cheap either. I'm thinking closed casket, of course." "Of course," Jonathan agreed, and I heard the smile in his voice. The same voice that had whispered, "I love you," just that morning. My legs trembled. I needed to move, to run, to scream. But training as a kindergarten teacher had taught me one valuable lesson: never let them see you panic. "Have you noticed how distracted she's been lately?" Helen asked. "Almost like she's depressed. That will help our narrative." They weren't wrong about the distraction. I'd been pulling away, spending more time with friends, working later at school. I'd felt Jonathan and Helen's grip tightening, their control becoming more suffocating. I just hadn't realized how literal that suffocation would be. "Lauren might be a problem," Jonathan mused. "They're too close." "Lauren?" Helen scoffed. "That scatterbrained friend of hers? She'll be too busy planning her next vacation to notice anything amiss. Besides, Nicole's been distant with everyone lately." My phone buzzed in my pocket, probably Lauren checking if my headache was better. I didn't dare move to check it. "Speaking of distance," Jonathan said, "what about her sister?" "Claire?" Helen laughed. "They haven't spoken in, 3 years? After that spectacular fight at Christmas? Claire won't be an issue." The mention of my sister sent a jolt through me. Claire, with her law degree and sharp mind, who'd warned me about Jonathan from the start. "He's isolating you, Nick," she'd said. "Can't you see it? I'd chosen Jonathan over her that Christmas, ending our relationship in a shower of angry words and slammed doors. Now I realized she'd seen what I'd been blind to all along. Still," Jonathan insisted, "we should be careful. Claire's clever." "Clever doesn't matter when there's no connection," Helen replied. "Now, about the service. I know the perfect funeral home." I'd heard enough. With trembling hands, I picked up my bag and backed silently toward the front door. I needed to think, to plan, to... The floor creaked beneath my foot. "Did you hear something?" Helen asked. "Probably just the house settling," Jonathan replied. "More tea, Mother?" I slipped out the door like a ghost, closing it with barely a click. My car was parked around the corner. Thank God for street cleaning day forcing me to move it. As I drove away, my mind raced faster than my car. They were planning to kill me. My husband and his mother had sat at our kitchen table, drinking tea from my favorite blue cups, and plotted my death like it was a dinner party. I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, hands shaking as I cut the engine. My phone buzzed again, another text from Lauren. But Lauren couldn't help me now. I needed someone stronger, someone smarter, someone who'd seen through Jonathan from the start. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I hadn't called in 3 years. My finger hovered over Claire's name as Helen's words echoed in my head. Claire won't be an issue. Oh, Helen, you have no idea how much of an issue Claire is about to become. I pressed dial. The call rang 3 times before Claire's voice, sharp and professional, cut through the line. This is Claire Henderson. Claire? My voice cracked. It's Nicole. The silence that followed felt longer than our 3 years apart. I could picture her in her office, probably still working despite the late hour, her desk meticulously organized, unlike my chaotic classroom. Are you drunk? She finally asked. No, I glanced around the empty diner parking lot. I need your help. I wouldn't call if it wasn't important. Like you needed my help 3 years ago? Before you told me to stay out of your perfect life? I deserved that. They're planning to kill me. Another pause. Who's planning to kill you? Jonathan and Helen. I overheard them tonight. They were discussing my funeral, how to make my death look natural. Helen even has medication from her nursing days. My words tumbled out faster than I could control them. Where are you now? Pete's Diner on Madison. Stay there, I'm coming. She hung up before I could respond. 20 minutes later, Claire's black Mercedes pulled into the spot next to mine. She looked exactly as I remembered. Perfectly tailored blazer, not a hair out of place even at this hour. But her eyes were softer than I expected. Inside, she said, nodding toward the diner. You look like you need coffee. The fluorescent lights made everything feel surreal as we slid into a booth. A tired waitress brought us coffee without asking, probably used to late-night crisis meetings in vinyl booths. Tell me everything, Claire said, adding 3 sugars to her coffee. Still the same sweet tooth. And don't leave anything out. I recounted what I'd overheard, watching her face remain carefully neutral. When I finished, she leaned back, arms crossed. You do realize how this sounds, right? Like I'm paranoid? Crazy? I wrapped my hands around my coffee mug. I know what I heard, Claire. That's not what I meant. She leaned forward. It sounds like exactly what I warned you about. The isolation, the control, the way they've been slowly suffocating you. Only now they're making it literal. I should have listened to you. Yes, you should have. She took a sip of coffee. But that's not helpful right now. What's your plan? Plan? I laughed weakly. My plan was calling you. And what do you expect me to do? File a police report about a conversation you overheard? They'll deny everything, and you'll look unstable, which is probably part of their setup. Then what do I do? Claire's eyes got that gleam I remembered from childhood, the one that always meant trouble. We make them reveal themselves. How? By giving them exactly what they want, your death. She held up a hand as I started to protest. Not literally. But if they want a funeral so badly, let's give them one they'll never forget. You want me to fake my own death? I want you to take your power back. She pulled out her phone, typing rapidly. But first, you need to answer something honestly. How did you let it get this far? The question hit like a slap. I don't know. Yes, you do. Her eyes met mine. You've been letting them chip away at you for years. Your job, your friends, your family, me. When was the last time you made a decision without considering their approval? I stared into my coffee, watching the ripples. I thought I was being a good wife. You were being a ghost, and now they want to make it permanent. She reached across the table, grabbing my hand. The sister I grew up with would never have let anyone treat her this way. What happened to her? She got lost, I whispered. Well, it's time to find her again. Claire squeezed my hand. But you have to be ready for what comes next. This isn't just about exposing them. It's about facing your own part in all this. What do you mean? You enabled them, Nick. Every time you stayed silent, every time you chose peace over truth, every time you pushed away people who saw through their act, you helped build this prison they've put you in. Her words stung because they were true. So what now? Now? A smile curved her lips. Now we plan a funeral, but first, you need somewhere safe to stay. Pack a bag. Tell Jonathan you're visiting a sick friend, someone he can't easily check on. Then come to my place. He'll be suspicious. Good. Let him squirm. Claire stood, dropping money on the table. And Nick, this time when I tell you something's wrong, try listening before 3 years pass. I watched my sister walk to her car, straight-backed and confident. The last time I'd seen her walk away, I'd chosen Jonathan's version of reality over hers. Now, I wondered how many other choices I'd need to unmake before this was over. My phone buzzed. A text from Jonathan. Where are you, sweetheart? Getting worried. I typed back, helping Lauren with a crisis. Might be a long night. The lies came so easily now, but for the first time, they felt like armor instead of chains. You need to look sicker, Claire said, studying me across her kitchen island. They need to believe you're deteriorating naturally. 3 days had passed since I'd moved into her sleek downtown apartment. Jonathan had bought my story about Lauren's crisis, though his daily check-in calls grew increasingly probing. I've already started missing work, I said, scrolling through concerned texts from my fellow teachers. Selah's covering my class. Good, but we need more. Claire pushed a notebook toward me. I've been researching symptoms that match what Helen's likely planning: fatigue, confusion, weakness, classic signs of slow poisoning. You're scarily good at this. I prosecute white-collar crimes for a living. You'd be amazed how many involve spouse elimination. She poured more coffee. Speaking of which, I had my investigator friend look into Jonathan's finances. And he's been moving money around. Small amounts. Nothing suspicious on its own, but together? She slid over some papers. He's building a nest egg, one you can't trace. My hands shook as I read the numbers. He's been planning this for months. Years, probably. Men like Jonathan don't improvise murder over breakfast. Claire's phone buzzed. That's Lauren. You ready? I nodded. We decided to bring Lauren in, partially because she was my closest friend, but mostly because Jonathan would expect her to visit if I was truly sick. Lauren arrived looking worried, her usual bright energy dimmed. Nicole? Claire called and said, "Oh my God, what's going on?" I let Claire explain while I sat on the couch, playing the part of the weakening wife. Lauren's face went from confusion to horror to rage. That bastard! She jumped up, pacing. We have to call the police. And tell them what? Claire asked. That they're planning something? We need proof. So, what's the plan? Lauren collapsed back into an armchair. Because you obviously have one. Claire outlined our strategy: my gradually worsening condition, the carefully staged hospital visits, thanks to her contact in the ER, and finally, the piece de resistance, my apparent death and funeral. You want to let them think they succeeded? Lauren's eyes widened. That's, that's brilliant and terrifying. We need witnesses, I said. People who'll remember their reactions, their behavior, people they can't control. Leave that to me, Lauren said, a gleam in her eye. I know exactly who to invite. Remember, Claire cautioned, this only works if they believe it's their plan succeeding. We have to be perfect. Speaking of perfect, Lauren turned to me. Have you thought about what happens after, when everything comes out? I hadn't. I'd been so focused on exposing their plan that I hadn't considered the aftermath. I'll figure it out. You'll stay with me, Claire said firmly. We've lost enough time already. A knock at the door made us all jump. Claire checked the security camera and swore softly. It's Corey, Jonathan's business partner? My heart raced. How did he know I was here? He doesn't. He's my neighbor. Claire straightened her blazer. Stay in the bedroom. Lauren, look like you're just leaving. I slipped into Claire's room, pressing my ear to the door. Claire, Corey's voice drifted through. Have you heard from Nicole? Jonathan's worried sick. Why would I have heard from my estranged sister? Come on, I know you two had issues, but if she's in trouble, the only trouble Nicole's ever had is letting other people make her decisions. Claire's voice was ice. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work. The door closed, and I waited until I heard Corey's footsteps fade before emerging. He suspects something, Lauren said. Of course he does. He's Jonathan's watchdog. Claire was already typing on her phone, but this might work in our favor. His concern makes Nicole's illness more believable. I should call Jonathan, I said. Play up how tired I'm feeling. Perfect. Claire handed me a script she'd prepared. Remember, confused, weak, but trying to hide it. Make him think his plan is working. I dialed, heart pounding. Jonathan answered on the first ring. Sweetheart, where are you? Just at Lauren's still. I made my voice faint. I'm not feeling great, actually. Might see a doctor tomorrow. You do sound awful. Should I come get you? No, I caught myself. No, I mean, I don't want to risk getting you sick. I'll come home when I'm better. If you're sure, his concern sounded so genuine. I miss you. Miss you too. The words tasted like ash. After hanging up, I found Claire watching me intently. You know what's really sick? Part of me still wants to believe he loves me. That's how they get you, she said softly. They make you doubt your own reality until their version becomes truth. Lauren squeezed my hand. Not anymore. Now we're writing the story. I looked at these two women, my sister, who I'd pushed away, and my friend who'd stayed despite everything, and felt something I hadn't in years, strength. Claire? I picked up the notebook of symptoms. Let's make this performance Oscar-worthy. The emergency room's fluorescent lights made my staged pallor look even more convincing. Dr. Marcus, Claire's contact, had coached me well on how to present my symptoms. Mrs. Ryan, a nurse called, right on schedule. The doctor will see you now. Jonathan squeezed my hand, playing the concerned husband perfectly. He'd insisted on bringing me after I'd collapsed at home during my brief return. Helen hovered nearby, her nurse's training making her especially attentive to every detail. I'm sure it's nothing, I whispered, letting my voice shake. Dr. Marcus performed the examination exactly as we'd rehearsed. Blood pressure, heart rate, basic neurological tests, all designed to suggest something subtle but serious. I'd like to run some tests, he said, frowning at his chart. The symptoms you're describing are concerning. Helen stepped forward. What kind of symptoms are you thinking, doctor? Let's not get ahead of ourselves. He smiled professionally. We'll start with blood work and go from there. In the waiting room, while I was supposedly getting tests, I texted Claire from the private room Dr. Marcus had arranged. Me. They're buying it. Helen's practically salivating over the medical details. Claire. Perfect. Corey's been asking questions around the building. Stay alert. A knock at the door made me jump. Lauren slipped in, carrying a coffee cup. Helen's grilling the nurses about your symptoms, she whispered. She's really playing up the concerned mother-in-law act. Of course she is. She needs witnesses to remember how devastated she was. Jonathan's making calls, probably setting up his alibi. Dr. Marcus returned with the test results, his face appropriately grave. Mrs. Ryan, we've found some concerning irregularities. I'd like to admit you for observation. Is it serious? Jonathan asked, right on cue. We need to run more tests to be certain. The next few hours followed our script perfectly. I was admitted, hooked up to monitors, and subjected to a battery of inconclusive tests. Helen barely left my side, probably ensuring no real medication could interfere with whatever she was planning. Around midnight, I overheard her in the hallway with Jonathan. It's progressing faster than expected, she whispered. Maybe we should. Mom, not here. Jonathan's voice was sharp. Let nature take its course. I almost laughed at the irony. Their natural course was anything but. The next morning brought an unexpected complication. Corey showed up, looking uncomfortable in the hospital setting. Nicole, he said, hovering by my bed. You look like death warmed over? I tried to joke, watching his face carefully. I was going to say tired. He glanced at the monitors. Jonathan's a mess, you know. Says you've been acting strange for weeks. Have I? I let my voice drift, as if confused. Everything's been so fuzzy lately. Corey leaned closer. If something's wrong, really wrong, you can tell me. For a moment, I was tempted. Corey had been Jonathan's friend since college, but there was genuine concern in his eyes. Nothing's wrong, I whispered. Just tired, so tired. He straightened as Jonathan returned with coffee. The two men exchanged looks I couldn't quite read. Later that afternoon, Sella visited with get well cards from my students. Her sharp eyes took in everything: the monitors, the worried faces, Helen's hovering presence. The kids miss you, she said, arranging flowers by my bed. Then, quieter. Something feels off here, Nicole. Everything's fine, I replied, but squeezed her hand twice, our old signal from teacher training when we needed to talk privately. She got the message. I'll come back tomorrow, when you're stronger. Helen watched her leave. Such devoted colleagues you have. I'm lucky, I murmured, letting my eyes drift shut. Yes, she said softly. You are. That evening, Dr. Marcus announced my condition was deteriorating rapidly. The monitors showed increasingly concerning readings, all carefully programmed. We should transfer her to a specialist, he suggested. No, Helen jumped in. She's too weak for a transfer. She needs familiar surroundings, family care. I want to go home, I whispered, playing my part. Jonathan stroked my hair. Whatever you want, sweetheart. Lauren arrived as they were preparing my discharge papers. Her eyes met mine briefly. Everything was set. I'll help take care of her, she offered. I can work remotely. That's not necessary, Helen said quickly. Family should handle this. I'm practically family, Lauren insisted, her smile hiding steel. I pretended to drift off as they argued, but I caught Jonathan's whispered words to Helen. Let her help. It's better this way. Better to have witnesses to my natural decline, he meant. Better to have someone else see how devotedly they cared for me in my final days. As they wheeled me out to Jonathan's car, I thought about Corey's concerned face, Sella's subtle signal, Lauren's determined presence. They all sensed something wrong, even if they couldn't name it. Soon, they wouldn't have to. Soon everyone would know exactly what kind of people Jonathan and Helen really were. I just had to die first. The funeral home smelled of lilies and lies. I watched from a hidden alcove as mourners filed in, their black clothes stark against the cream-colored walls. Claire's contact in the mortuary business had arranged everything perfectly, including my hiding spot behind a two-way mirror. Such a tragedy, someone whispered. So young. My death had been perfectly orchestrated. A peaceful passing in my sleep, just as Helen had planned. though not by her hand. The medical examiner, another of Claire's connections, had ruled it as organ failure from an undiagnosed condition. Jonathan stood by my closed casket, accepting condolences with practiced grief. Helen sat in the front row, dabbing at dry eyes with a black handkerchief. "You okay?" Claire whispered beside me. "It's surreal," I replied, watching my kindergarten students place drawings on the casket. "Seeing your own funeral." Lauren arrived, leading a group of my colleagues. Selah's eyes were red, but sharp as they scanned the room. She paused at the casket, placing a hand on it, then whispered something to Lauren that made them both glance at Helen. "Your mother-in-law would like to say a few words," the funeral director announced. Helen approached the podium, the perfect picture of grieving elegance. "Nicole was more than my daughter-in-law," she began, her voice trembling. "She was the daughter I never had." Beside me, Claire made a disgusted sound. "We watched her struggle these past weeks," Helen continued, "her mysterious illness taking such a toll. If only we'd known sooner, perhaps." She paused, dabbing her eyes. "But Nicole wouldn't want us to dwell on what couldn't be changed. She lived her life serving others, her students, her friends, and most importantly, her beloved husband, my son." I felt bile rise in my throat. "Jonathan was her whole world," Helen said, looking at her son. "Everything she did was for him. Her dedication was absolute." The word choice wasn't accidental. Helen was painting a picture of a wife who lived only for her husband, making my death seem like the ultimate sacrifice. Corey shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Next to him, Selah's expression had turned to stone. "I remember the last cup of tea we shared." Helen's voice cracked perfectly. She was so tired, but still insisted on using her special blue cups, always thinking of others, right until the end. My hands clenched into fists. The blue cups, the ones they'd planned to use for my murder. She was actually working them into her eulogy. "It's time," Claire whispered, checking her phone. Right on cue, Lauren stood up. "I'm sorry, but I can't listen to this anymore." The room froze. Helen's perfectly composed face cracked slightly. "Nicole was my best friend," Lauren continued, her voice carrying clearly, "and she was terrified the last few weeks of her life, not of dying, but of the people closest to her." "Lauren, please," Jonathan stepped forward. "This isn't the place. She told me things," Lauren pressed on, "about conversations she overheard, about plans being made, about special tea and blue cups." Helen's face went white. "Perhaps we should take a moment." The funeral director intervened. "No," Selah stood up. "Lauren's right. Something was wrong. Nicole came to me too, scared and confused, but not about her illness." Jonathan's mask of grief began to slip. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't we?" Claire's voice rang out as she entered from the back. "Because I have some interesting financial records that suggest otherwise, brother-in-law." The room erupted in whispers. Helen gripped the podium, knuckles white. "What are you implying?" she demanded. "Oh, I think you know exactly what I'm implying." Claire smiled coldly. "About insurance policies and medication and perfectly planned natural deaths." "This is outrageous," Jonathan sputtered. "We're here to mourn my wife." "Are we?" I stepped out from my hiding place. "Or are you here to celebrate a job well done?" The gasps were audible. Someone screamed. Helen staggered back from the podium, her face ashen. "Hello, Mother Helen," I said, walking toward her. "Would you like to finish telling everyone about that last cup of tea you had planned for me?" Jonathan moved toward the door, but Corey blocked his path. "Going somewhere, partner?" "Nicole," Helen whispered. "This isn't, we didn't what? Plan my funeral over breakfast? Discuss how to make my death look natural? Choose which poison would be untraceable?" The room had gone deathly quiet. Every eye was fixed on us, exactly as planned. "You're supposed to be dead," Jonathan said, his voice hollow. "Sorry to disappoint." I turned to address the stunned mourners. I apologize for the deception, but it seemed fitting. After all, they put so much effort into planning my funeral. I thought they should get to enjoy it. "You have no proof," Helen hissed, but her eyes darted to the doors. "Actually," Claire stepped forward, holding up her phone, "we have quite a lot of proof, including some very interesting recordings." As if on cue, Helen's voice filled the room from Claire's phone. Mixed into her evening tea, she'll just drift off. No pain, no mess. The funeral home erupted into chaos. But through it all, I kept my eyes locked on Jonathan and Helen, watching their carefully constructed world crumble around them. It wasn't the funeral they'd planned, but it was exactly the one they deserved. "You've ruined everything," Helen spat, her composure finally shattering. "Everything we built, everything we planned." "Everything you planned for me, you mean?" I stepped closer. "Tell them, Helen. Tell everyone how carefully you planned my death." The funeral home had erupted into a mix of shocked murmurs and ringing phones as people called the police. Jonathan remained frozen, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. "You don't understand," he said, reaching for me. "We were trying to protect you." "Protect me?" I jerked away from his touch. "By killing me? From yourself." Helen's voice rose hysterically. "Look at you, so ungrateful, so selfish. We gave you everything." "You gave me nothing except chains," I shot back. "You controlled every aspect of my life until there was nothing left of me." "We made you better," Helen insisted. "Before us, you were nothing, just a kindergarten teacher with delusions of independence." Selah stepped forward. "Those delusions of independence? We call that being a human being, Helen." "Stay out of this," Jonathan snapped. "This is family business." "Family?" Lauren laughed bitterly. "Is that what you call plotting to murder your wife?" Two police officers entered the funeral home, followed by Claire, who must have called them earlier. The room grew quiet as they approached. "That's them," Claire said, pointing to Jonathan and Helen. "I have recordings and financial documents proving their conspiracy to commit murder." "This is ridiculous," Jonathan tried to regain control. "Officers, my wife is clearly unstable." "Play the recording," I interrupted. "The one from this morning, Helen, about the blue cups." Claire pressed play on her phone, and Helen's voice filled the room again, detailing exactly how they'd planned to poison me. The officers exchanged glances and moved toward them. "You want to know why?" Helen's voice had gone quiet, dangerous. "Because you were destroying him. Your neediness, your friends, your pathetic little job. You were holding him back." "Mrs. Ryan," one officer started. "He could have been everything," Helen shouted. "But you made him weak, just like my husband made me weak." The room went still. Even Jonathan turned to stare at his mother. "What are you talking about?" he asked. "Your father?" Helen's laugh was bitter. "He was just like her, always wanting love, attention, connection. Disgusting. He made me stay home, raise you, give up my career. And for what? So he could die and leave us with nothing?" "Mom," Jonathan's face had gone pale. "I promised myself you'd be different," she continued, her words tumbling out. "Strong, independent. But then you married her, and I saw it happening all over again. The same weakness, the same dependency." "So you decided to kill me?" I asked softly. "To save Jonathan from becoming like his father? To save him from becoming nothing?" Helen's composure cracked completely. "I didn't spend 30 years building him up just to watch some schoolteacher tear him down." The officers moved forward, handcuffs ready. Helen didn't resist as they read her rights, her eyes fixed on Jonathan. I did it for you, she whispered. Everything was for you. Jonathan stood frozen as they led his mother away. When the second officer approached him, he seemed to wake up. Nicole, he pleaded, you know I love you. We can fix this. Fix this. I gestured around the funeral home. You planned my murder, Jonathan. You sat in our kitchen and discussed how to kill me like you were planning a dinner party. I didn't. She convinced me. No, I cut him off. You chose this. Every step of the way, you chose this. The officer took Jonathan's arm. He went quietly, looking lost and somehow smaller than I'd ever seen him. As they led him out, Corey approached me. I knew something was wrong, but this, I never imagined. None of us did. Lauren put her arm around my shoulders. The funeral home slowly emptied, leaving me with Claire, Lauren, and Sella. The closed casket still stood at the front, covered in children's drawings. What happens now? Sela asked. Now? Claire checked her phone. Now the media gets hold of this, and we make sure everyone knows exactly what they tried to do. And me? I touched one of my students' drawings, a bright rainbow with "We love you, Ms. Nicole" written in crooked letters. You live, Lauren said simply. You teach, you laugh, you exist. Everything they tried to stop you from doing. I looked around the room that was supposed to witness my final goodbye. Instead, it had witnessed my rebirth. Helen was wrong, you know, Sela said quietly, about weakness and love being the same thing. Your love for your students, your friends, that's what saved you. No, I corrected her, thinking of Helen's revelation about her past. Understanding saved me. Understanding that their strength was really fear and their control was really weakness. Claire squeezed my hand. Ready to get out of here? I think we've had enough of funerals. I nodded, taking one last look at the room. Yes, I think it's time to start living again. The courthouse hallway buzzed with tension as we waited for Jonathan and Helen's bail hearing to begin. I sat between Claire and Lauren, watching reporters scribble in their notepads. Ms. Ryan? A man approached, his face hauntingly familiar. I'm Randy, Helen's brother. I stiffened, but Claire touched my arm. It's okay. He reached out to me yesterday. Randy looked nothing like his sister. Where Helen was all sharp edges and cold precision, he carried a gentle warmth. I need to tell you something, he said, sitting across from us, about Helen and why she became this. We already know about her husband, I started. No, you don't. Randy's eyes clouded. You know her version. The truth is different. Lauren leaned forward. What do you mean? Our father was... Randy paused, choosing his words carefully. He believed in control, absolute control. Helen learned early that love meant ownership. When she married Thomas, Jonathan's father, she finally had someone who showed her real love. But she said he made her weak, I said. Randy laughed bitterly. Thomas made her human. He encouraged her to keep nursing, to have friends, to live. But she couldn't handle it. Real love terrified her more than our father's control ever did. So what happened? Claire asked, her lawyer's instincts engaged. She poisoned him. Randy's words fell like stones. Slowly, over months. Everyone thought it was heart failure. I only found out years later when she was drunk at Christmas and confessed. The hallway seemed to spin. Did Jonathan know? No, but she raised him in our father's image, teaching him that love was weakness, that control was strength. Randy rubbed his face. I should have spoken up sooner. When I saw how she was with you. Why tell us now? Claire demanded. Because the police found Thomas's old medical records. They're reopening his case. Randy handed Claire a folder. Here's everything I know. Maybe it can help make sure she never hurts anyone else. Before I could respond, the courtroom doors opened. As we filed in, I caught sight of Jonathan. He looked smaller in his orange jumpsuit, his eyes darting between me and Helen. Helen sat ramrod straight, her expression blank until she saw Randy. Something flickered across her face. Fear, maybe, or recognition. The hearing proceeded quickly. No bail for either of them. Flight risks, the judge said. As they were led away, Helen suddenly turned. Randy, her voice cracked. Tell them about Father. Tell them why I had to be strong. No, Helen. Randy replied quietly. Tell them about Thomas. Tell them what strength really cost you. She crumpled then, years of careful control dissolving as officers led her away. Jonathan watched his mother's breakdown with dawning horror. Nicole, he called out, I didn't know about my father. I didn't know. Would it have changed anything? I asked. His silence was answer enough. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us. Claire handled them expertly while Lauren shielded me from the cameras. Randy hung back, looking lost. Thank you, I told him, for telling the truth. I should have done it years ago. He handed me an envelope. These are Thomas's last letters to Helen. He knew something was wrong, but he never stopped loving her. Maybe that was his real strength. Later that evening, in Claire's apartment, we read the letters. Thomas's words painted a picture of a man who saw his wife's darkness but chose to meet it with light until the very end. Listen to this, Claire read aloud. My dearest Helen, I know you're afraid of what love might make you. But love doesn't make us weak. It gives us the courage to be vulnerable. I'll wait as long as it takes for you to understand that. He never got the chance, Lauren said softly. No, I replied, thinking of Jonathan. And she made sure their son never would either. Selah arrived with dinner and news from school. The parents are being amazing. They want you back whenever you're ready. Really? Even after everything? Especially after everything. She smiled. You showed those kids that standing up to bullies isn't just something we teach, it's something we live. My phone buzzed with a text from Corey. Found more financial records. Claire was right. They've been planning this for years. I'm so sorry I didn't see it sooner. It's not your fault, I texted back. We all saw what they wanted us to see. Claire poured wine for everyone except Randy, who preferred coffee. We sat in her living room, this strange group brought together by tragedy, but bound now by something stronger. To karma, Lauren raised her glass. May it always find its mark. To truth, Randy added quietly. To strength, Claire said, looking at me. The real kind. I thought about Thomas's letters, about Helen's twisted version of love, about Jonathan learning the wrong lessons from both his parents. To healing, I said finally, and to starting over. As we clinked glasses, I realized that this messy, honest, imperfect connection was what Helen had feared most. Not weakness, but the strength it takes to be truly seen and known by others. And for the first time since this all began, I felt genuinely, completely free. The kindergarten classroom buzzed with energy as my students worked on their art projects. Bright paper hearts covered the walls, their welcome back gift to me. Ms. Nicole, Sarah tugged my sleeve. Is it true you're a superhero now? I knelt beside her desk. What makes you think that? My mommy said you fought bad guys and won. She beamed. Like Wonder Woman. Not exactly like Wonder Woman, I laughed, but I did learn something important, that being brave doesn't mean being alone. The classroom door opened and Claire stepped in, carrying a manila envelope. The kids waved. They'd met my sister during our weekly lunch visits. Court documents, she whispered, handing me the envelope. They both took the plea deal. My hands trembled slightly as I read. 20 years for Helen. The evidence from Thomas's case had sealed her fate. 15 for Jonathan, with no possibility of early release. The DA says Randy's testimony was crucial. Claire added, he's thinking about writing a book about Helen and Thomas. Good, I said. watching my students create their artwork. Some stories need to be told. The afternoon bell rang, and parents began arriving. Lauren appeared with them, carrying coffee and her laptop. "Ready for our house hunting session?" she asked. "I found some great places near the school." "Actually," Claire interrupted, "I had a thought about that." She pulled out her phone, showing us photos of a beautiful craftsman house with a wraparound porch. "It's 2 blocks from me," she said. "3 bedrooms, perfect for a fresh start. And," she hesitated, "maybe room for a roommate if you want company while you adjust." Tears pricked my eyes. "You want to live together?" "Well, we have a lot of time to make up for." She shrugged, trying to look casual. "Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't subsist entirely on takeout." Lauren clapped her hands. "Perfect. I'll call the realtor right now." "Ms. Nicole?" Another student, Marcus, approached. "I made this for you." He handed me a drawing of 2 stick figures holding hands. "Is that me?" I asked. "You and your sister," he said proudly. "Mom says family is supposed to hold hands, not hurt." Out of the mouths of babes. The classroom slowly emptied until only Selah remained, helping me clean up. "The school board approved your proposal," she said. "We're starting the emotional awareness program next semester." I smiled, remembering how the idea had come to me during therapy, teaching children early about healthy relationships and recognizing manipulation. "Helen would hate it," I said, "teaching kids to trust their feelings instead of suppressing them." "Good thing she'll be busy for the next couple decades." My phone buzzed. A text from Corey. "Finished transferring all company assets to new ownership. Jonathan can't touch any of it now. Dinner next week to celebrate?" "Speaking of celebration," Claire said, reading over my shoulder, "Lauren's planning a housewarming party once you're settled. She's invited half the courthouse." "Including Randy?" "He's bringing Thomas's old photo albums. Said you might want to see who Jonathan could have been if things had been different." I looked around my classroom, at the bright artwork, the tiny desks, the safe space we'd created here, then at my sister, who'd never stopped believing in me, even when I'd stopped believing in myself. "You know what Helen never understood?" I said, picking up Marcus's drawing. "Real strength isn't about control or power. It's about having the courage to stay open even after being hurt." "Like teaching kindergarten after everything that happened?" Selah smiled. "Like letting my sister back into my life," I corrected. "Like building something new instead of hiding from what was broken." Claire wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "Ready to go home?" "Almost." I walked to my desk and pulled out the blue teacups, the ones Helen had planned to use for my murder. I'd kept them as a reminder. "What are you going to do with those?" Lauren asked. I handed one to each of them. "We're going to break them, together, then use the pieces for an art project with the kids, turning something meant for harm into something beautiful." "Now that," Claire said, "is real karma." We each held a cup, these delicate things that had almost been weapons. "To new beginnings," Lauren said. "To chosen family," Selah added. "To real strength." Claire smiled at me. I lifted my cup. "To living." The sound of breaking porcelain echoed through the classroom like music. Tomorrow, these shards would become part of a mosaic, broken pieces creating something whole and new, just like me. As we gathered the pieces, I thought about Helen in her cell, Jonathan in his, both trapped by their own versions of strength. And here I was, surrounded by love, creating art from destruction. Maybe that's what real power looks like, not the ability to break things, but the courage to piece them back together, differently and beautifully. "Come on," Claire said, gathering her things. "Let's go find you a home." I took one last look at my classroom, at the hearts on the walls, at the broken cups waiting to become something new. "I already have one," I said, following my sister out the door. I just had to fight to find it.